Okay, we're on, and I want to welcome everybody again to one of my live interviews. I haven't done one in a while. Oh, by a while, I mean a couple of weeks or 10 days or something. And I'm very thrilled that today we have, I think maybe it's my second time around. I've got a repeat customer in Marcus Grodi of the Coming Home Network. And I got to get that right. I always confuse Coming Home Network with the Journey Home.
I know. Mother Angelica had warned me on the very first Journey Home program that I did. She said, now look, don't mention Coming Home Network because people will get it confused with
The Journey Home.
EWTN, Eternal Word. I said, fine, I won't do that. So when I started the program,
Guilty.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Coming Home Network. I screwed it up the very first time.
Hey, you know what? Can we talk a little bit too about Mother Angelica today? Because I was
dime, my friend.
I was on EWTN twice on Mother Angelica Live, and I have some things I'd like to talk about. But anyway, let's start with a Hail Mary. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Yeah. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Mary, seat of wisdom, pray for us. Well, as usual, I think my guest today needs no introduction. I think most of my viewers know who Marcus Grodi is, but he does run the Coming Home Network, and he has also been on EW. How long on EWTN? How many years?
25, just about 25
25 years on the journey home. And like I think I mentioned last time you were on, my pastor, Father Eric Bergman,
right,
who is the pastor of our ordinariate parish, was on your show, speaks very highly of you. He's a great priest, by the way, just a great priest. Best pastor I've ever had. And guess what? He's married and has 10 kids. So that's a conversation for another day maybe as well.
Right.
Although I did write a blog post on that once that generated some controversy.
Just as a point of that, I just happened to attend a funeral of a very blessed friend, Ruth Ryland, who was the wife of Father Ray Ryland. And Ruthie was 100 years old when she passed away in Steubenville. But what's significant about Ruth Ryland, Father Ray Ryland was the first Anglican clergy convert to petition Rome.
Oh, yeah.
Back in 1980, he petitioned then with Bishop Law to Rome to open the gates for the church to let Anglican clergy converts. And
that was, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, and the petition went to Rome. And then Father Parker was the first married in that time period.
Right.
Father Ray was the fourth. And if you will, then that meant that Ruth was the fourth priest's wife. And if Father Ray was the first to petition, then it was because Ruth gave him permission. So if you will, she's the one that opened the gate for all of this. So this was for the Pastoral Provision and then later the Anglican Ordinary.
Oh, yes. So he was before the Pastoral Provision. That was what I was going to ask.
Yeah. In the 50s, Pius XII had let some German Lutheran clergy converts become married priests, but that had long been forgotten. And then Ray, who was then just a Catholic deacon, went through cardinal law, and they petitioned John Paul.
That's just as I said in my blog post, I have no fixed position on the issue. I have very mixed feelings about it. All my life long, I have been an avid supporter of mandatory celibacy as an ascetic discipline in the Western Church, as a powerful eschatological sign. In a sex-saturated, pornified culture, it's an eschatological sign that maybe we need now more than ever. And I know a lot of very, very dedicated, wonderful priests. Isn't your son a priest?
Yes. My middle son, Peter, is almost 2 years a priest.
Yes. And so, God bless him. He's living that same eschatological witness. But I have to admit, I left the seminary precisely because I did not want to give up family and wife. After 7 years of being in the seminary, I very much wanted to be a priest, but decided family was the path for me. And so, I've always had the rattling in the back of my head, would it have been so bad for the church to ordain me, as a married guy? But then actually my experience in the ordinariate of Father Bergman has really opened my eyes to the fact that it's not simply, having a married priesthood isn't simply a concession for the sake of increasing vocations or whatever.
Right.
It's a gift, a beautiful gift and a beautiful charism all its own. The pastor's wife, the pastor's family is a powerful, especially when you have a large one like Father Bergman does, it's such a powerful witness. And when Father Bergman had a son with trisomy that died, a trisomy genetic disorder that died, I've never seen a parish more unified in love and the bonds of charity than I saw. So, there's something to be said to think about it. Hey, but, unless you want to comment on that, that's not why I brought you on today.
I'll just say that the reason, as far as I understand, the reason it was called a pastoral provision is this wasn't a concession. This wasn't when the married clergy came into the church, they weren't breaking a vow of celibacy or anything. They had discerned a real call from God to
Right.
get married and to go into ministry, and the church affirms that. So in a pastoral way, when they come into the church, they recognize, the Lord worked in their life, the Lord gave them gifts, the Lord gave them a calling. Now, how can we allow these men to continue using their gifts in the church? So it isn't a challenge to celibacy or anything. It's recognizing the
really
work
isn't.
of God in their life.
The work of God. And okay, so we're still on this topic because I have another point I want to make about this, which is this. With all due, concession to the idea that, this might just be subjectivity on my part. Nevertheless, I'm one of those people that I can honestly say that and I've thought about this for decades now, prayed about it. I truly believe, especially now in hindsight, that I was being called by God to both the priesthood and the married state. I believe that. But the church, because of her canonical strictures, made me choose, and choose I did. And I'm not criticizing the church for that. The church has a right to set her own disciplines, and this is actually an honorable discipline that, like I said, I supported for many, many, many years. But I do think, you look at the example of Eastern Rite priests and Eastern Orthodox priests and now Anglican ordinariate priests. It simply is not true, as Cardinal Sarah said in one of his books, it's not true that there's an intrinsic link between priesthood and celibacy.
Yeah.
There is not there is an intrinsic link between priesthood and a tradition of celibacy and a linkage with that tradition. But to say that it's constitutive to the very warp and woof of the priesthood is simply not true. That's my thought.
I would agree with you on that. Good St. John Paul II, when he, in a number of his writings, but particularly when he did his Wednesday audiences after he did Theology of the Body, he then did, for about 10 years, he did Wednesday audiences on the Creed, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, the Church, and he did all that. And in that, he talked about this very issue. And there's one place in there that I think he went a little too far when he kind of gave this thing like you're talking about. That
right.
And it's hard to say that on the same hand that you're saying we got to breathe from both lungs. How do you do that?
Yeah. But it does give me pause because I have such great respect for John Paul,
right,
and other people who I greatly admire, who have been a total inspiration in my life, like Father Joseph Fessio of Ignatius Press. He's made a similar argument about it's of apostolic origin. It's really deeply embedded in the priesthood in profound theological ways. It's a distortion of the priesthood for the priest to get married. When a Father Fessio makes that kind of an argument, your ears perk up and you say, well, maybe I'm wrong. He's a smart guy and I love him. And so is John Paul. But I have to admit, at age 63, finally, within the past year, for the first time in my life, at least I've begun to question whether or not that argument is true. And I'm not saying the church should change its discipline at all. What do I know? Who the heck am I? And I've known a lot of great celibate priests. But anyway, that's not why, geez. But I think that was the Holy Spirit moving us to talk about something right there. That's how I'll justify that, Doug. The main reason, folks, I brought Marcus back on the show today is that along with all of the things you know him for, he's also written quite a bit and has lived the life on a farm. He is, I guess, what we would call these days a cottage farmer, or you don't like the word homesteader. I'm not a big fan of the word homesteader either. But
it's popular and it describes what we do, So.
But I thought that it was important to talk about this. We didn't get a chance to move into it in our last conversation because we were so focused on theological things. Because I do believe that there are theological resonances and implications to back to the land movement in some ways. And I also have a vested interest in it because I own a Catholic worker farm, and Peter Moore, the co-founder of the Catholic worker movement, was a sort of man way ahead of his time, who already in the 1920s and 30s was developing this sort of E.F. Schumacher, small is beautiful, environmentalist, integral ecology, whatever you want to call it, vision of the need to go back to the land for spiritual reasons and not just, agricultural reasons. And a big believer in the fact that there was something about a return to the rhythms of living on the land that was spiritually enriching.
Go ahead.
I
want to pick up right on something you said about Peter Moran. And I discovered Dorothy Day and Peter Moran later in life, and admittedly grew up with kind of a negative view.
Right. A lot of people do, yeah.
Dorothy Day, both from my evangelical Protestant background, so she would have fit into the social gospel, liberal left part of Protestantism.
Oh, yeah.
From my perspective. And then when I became a Catholic, I had everybody else's view. But then I discovered actually reading Dorothy Day, and it came more from my movement towards agrarian thinking, agrarian theology, philosophy, ideology, that I became open to Dorothy Day. I remember reading a wonderful book. At least I liked the book. I can't remember the author or the name, but it was a book about 10 years ago that had 4 biographies in it. It had Dorothy Day, O'Connor.
The Life You Say May Be Your Own.
Yes. I liked that book because it had Thomas Merton. It had the 4 converts.
Flannery O'Connor, Thomas Merton, Dorothy Day.
And the author, Walker Percy.
Yeah, Walker Percy, yeah.
And it compared their journeys, which was fascinating to me. Yeah. But that kind of introduced me more into Dorothy. I read her stuff. I read a couple of her biographies. Now, you have to help me out here because I can't picture when Peter and Dorothy were exactly in our history, but in terms of
around 1930.
Okay, well, that puts them smack dab into the 12 Southerners, and I'll take my stand. That whole writing about that agrarian movement from a Southern perspective, it then puts them right smack dab in that whole 30s movement of the rethinking of agrarianism. It's kind of at the tail end of Chesterton and Belloc's writing, but there's a totally forgotten book that was published in 1940 by 2 priests, one of Luigi something or the other, Ligeti, and who was one of the heads of the Catholic Rural Life League, and another Jesuit priest. And the book's called Rural Roads to Security. And you can find that online and download the PDF. But it's almost like it was expressing the very thing that had moved Peter Moran and others. And one of the main things in his understanding about agrarian thinking, distributist thinking versus the completely rise and surrender to technology and materialism that was happening in America, where everybody thought the only other options were socialism and communism. And it's like, no, but that doesn't mean that we should jump with all 5 feet into capitalism, materialism. He was talking about in 1940, he was talking about instead of giving unemployed, homeless people money, why not give them an acre of land? Why not give them a place to start? Yeah. And he started a Granger movement out in the Midwest. And here's this wonderful book with a complete explanation on how to do it in 1940. But you know why it ended up on library shelves, totally forgotten? Because something happened at Pearl Harbor.
Oh, yes.
And when that happened, it changed everything.
Oh, the whole world changed with World War II.
Yep.
And that whole agrarian movement and that whole distributism, personalism, all that stuff that came out in the 20s, 30s, that Dorothy Day and Peter Morin were a part of. Yep. Absolutely. It is part of a package way of thing. Now, Dorothy and Peter had their own unique charisma as well. They added the whole thing about service to the poor, pacifism, anti-capitalism, all that stuff. Okay, that became the Catholic worker movement. But Peter Morin was less inclined to Dorothy's political activism and Dorothy's sort of speak truth to power. Peter Morin, his vision was you build a new society within the shell of the old. So think here kind of Benedict option before its time. He and Peter Morin once said with regard to strikes and political activism, strikes don't strike me. And he didn't mean that people shouldn't go on strike or fight for labor laws. What he meant was, I want to go even down deeper. I'll let Dorothy do all the activist stuff. I'm a big believer in getting back to the land, artisanal skills, Benedictine prayer rhythms, this kind of thing. Now, of course, Dorothy was a Benedictine oblate as well. So, but here, I want to come back to your thing about the book that says give everybody an acre of land, because it segues into something that we can talk about with regard to modern day sort of back to the landism, which is this. Throughout the course of the past century or two, many well-meaning people, even in governments, have come up with the idea of let's give a bunch of poor people a bunch of land, right? We'll give them each 3 acres or 2 acres. It's been tried in countries and it always fails. It always ends up almost leading to famine. And the reason is it's hard to farm. And I remember when I started our little 11-acre farm, I got 2 pieces of advice that were both wise. One was from a woman named Lois Miles, a former student of mine, Protestant, but she got a PhD in Balthazar or something, Adrienne von Speyer, and in Scotland. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. She's an older student of mine, and she lives on a farm, and she's heard that I was starting a farm, and Lois said to me, I said to her, do you have any advice for me, Lois? And she goes, yes, expect failure. and if you expect failure, then you won't be disappointed when it comes. And I kind of wanted to throw her off a cliff or a bridge, like, well, that's a discouraging thing to say to some, but truer words were never spoken. Expect failure, and fail I did. And the other piece of advice came from a woman at a Catholic worker house in New York, Jean Kennedy. And she said to me, Larry, just don't buy into the whole self-sustaining BS, the whole prepper nonsense, the whole, we're going to build a Catholic compound with buried school buses and stockpiled rosaries and stuff. She goes, just get that notion right. Not that the buried school bus was in my head, but you know what I mean. I'm painting a caricature here of sort of Catholic compounds. And that's what she meant. But anyway, that you sent me a little essay today that listed various genres of writings on whatever you want to call it, the homesteading movement, the cottage farming movement, and problems that people often face. So why don't you go through some of those talking points for us, segueing right into the idea of failure, if you don't mind.
Right. Well, my good friend, I've had my toe in this water now for 25 years, and it never crossed my mind for the first 40 years of my life. Two things never crossed my mind for the first 40 years of my life. One, to become Catholic. Never. And one, even more so, to be a farmer. I mean, just never.
Yeah. You wouldn't mind either. Well, the Catholic part, but yeah.
Well, in the Catholic part, there was a reason,
Yeah.
But, who would want to become Catholic? That was the way I grew up, thinking I could come up with 1,000 reasons why you would not want to become Catholic. But farmer, it's like, why would anybody go back to being a farmer? My family had left the farm many generations before. And I don't want to talk about, I grew up thinking that the definition of a farmer was a man outstanding in his field. That's the definition of a farmer, and I just never, but then we got this land. I married someone, Marilyn, who their families were still connected to the farm. They had 2-century farms on both sides of their family. And so we'd visit her family, and even though her parents weren't farming anymore, they were living in the midst of these acres. And then when her grandfather died, we inherited 10 acres. And we were living in a city. And I was working for a university, and everything was going great. I figured I'd be there the rest of my life. But in the 90s, things were getting rough in the city. And I decided, this is not where I want my boys to grow up. And I was working into a nonprofit, just starting to Coming Home Network. So we got this land. So why don't we give it a try? And I was moving out there just to build. I designed a house, and we had our house built. And so we're living in this salt box house out in the middle of the woods. And that's all that I thought we're hunkering down. But then across the valley is a 100-year-old barn my wife's grandfather and great-grandfather built by hand from the woods on that land.
Wow.
That started everything. And what do we do? And remember, something else I mentioned in this article that I just penned this afternoon, Larry, that I thought maybe you'd connect with. And that was the realization that, this whole idea of being frogs in a soup pot, that we as a culture sometimes are blind to the ways we've been shaped by this soup that we're in. We just can't see it because we've been in it all our life. And one of them is, Larry, that we've lived all our lives with these voices that tell us we're living on the end of the age.
I wanted to get into this. I'm right off the bat. So thank you for bringing this up. The sort of apocalypticism.
Our whole life has been there. I remember in the 60s, as a teenager, remember, we're on the eve of destruction. Remember that song?
Yeah. Oh, you don't have to tell me. As a teenage boy, I left my Catholic faith for Hal Lindsey, late great Planet Earth, born again, dispensationalist, Jesus is coming back, Gog and Magog. I went to Bible prophecy seminars, and that hangover stayed with me for a long time, even after I reverted to the faith, that sort of apocalyptic vision, which then just got transferred to Marian apparitions, well, Jesus isn't angry, Mary is, and now, or what's even worse, Jesus is angry and only Mary can save us from her son's anger, which really is kind of a Mariolatry if you think about it, because she becomes then the agent of our salvation. The kind of message, I can't hold back my son's hand too much longer. We need more rosaries and reparations. Otherwise, my son's wrath will come pouring. Are you kidding me? As soon as a Marian apparition says that, I'm out the door, because at that point, Mary is more merciful than Christ. And therein, then, the Protestant critique of everything every Catholic supposedly believes about Mary is true, right? Yeah. But I digress. The point is this apocalypticism. So go back to that, because I think it's so important.
Yeah. I mean, in my own life, I remember Hal Lindsey's books. I was a nominal Christian most of until my 20s. I had a born again experience, changed my life. And so in 1970s, then I go to seminary. But during that time is Hal Lindsey's books, and I'm reading them. And And I remember in 1988, a book came out, 88 Reasons Why He's Coming in 1988. And then when he didn't come in 88, the guy put out, 1989 is going to be the year. I mean, it was just one after another. And I remember those days.
Yeah.
And so I thought I was leaving it behind when I came into the church in 1992. I land in Steubenville, and all of a sudden there's all the Marian stuff.
Yeah.
And many of the...
And by the way, before you go on, so we don't get hate mail, we believe in the approved Marian apparitions of the church.
100%.
Fatima,
100%. Visiting.
Yeah.
I visited Van O in
what we're talking about is this cottage industry of Marian locutions and things that people have gotten, or various unapproved apparitions, and that people do follow. So anyway, I interrupted your flow.
And with that, what you're just saying is what goes along with those is this fear that we're on the edge. We're always on the edge. And you know, I became great friends with some pretty outspoken Marian theologians. And, you know, I remember in 1997, and then 1998, and then 1999. I mean, here's everybody thinking not only at Y2K and the end of the world is in our culture and everything. I mean, yeah. So people that know me know that I actually did a TV show in EWTN about Y2K. I hosted one and I helped write a book about it. But I wrote a book chapter on the spiritual preparation for it. And actually I ended up including that chapter in my later book because it's the same end. We're always to live.
Hey, for the viewers that might be too young to know what Y2K is, you know, it's when we changed to the year 2000. Everybody was worried that computers were going to go on the fritz because they wouldn't know what to do with the 00 or something or other. Yeah, and so the whole grid was going to collapse or something.
Actually, even the writers at Scientific American couldn't say for certain.
Right. Nobody knew.
They did not know. How do we get through it? I think the industry threw gazillions of dollars into making sure that every computer was fixed immediately. So, but anyway, all that being said, the point was with all this for all of our life, the soup that we're in, all the stuff you just said a moment ago about all the preppers and all that, we've been in this soup our entire lives. Yeah. And it's there. Their voices. And when we see scandals in our church, when we see COVID pandemics in the world, we see Russia going to war, China almost, we see all these things. And, you know, first of all, you know, biblical apocalyptic folk go crazy. You know, they've got verse and verse and said, yeah, we're on the edge of, the eve of destruction. So my point in all this is, for many people, that's the motive and behind, I'm getting out of this place and I'm going out to the country. I'm going to go out and be self-sustaining so that if anything go around here, it's all right. I'm going to be just fine. But what they don't often, as you mentioned earlier about just give everybody a piece of land, not everybody's called to be a farmer. It's as much of a calling. If you look at Thomas Aquinas, wrote some great stuff about the rural life. Thomas Aquinas saw the vocation of the farmer as one of the highest in our culture. And it's a true calling because it takes unique skills.
I mean, it's a neat idea to give to empower people. It's a distributist idea, but it has to be done wisely. But I want to throw something in here. You know, there's that old saying, just because you're paranoid, it doesn't mean they're not out to get you. And it's also true, just because we're throwing out here some cautionary statements about apocalypticism, it doesn't mean that Jesus isn't coming back soon. It doesn't mean that maybe the eschaton isn't upon us. We are to live as Christians like the wise virgins who had their lamps filled with oil.
I've got to correct you, my friend. If you're a good ressourcement theologian, following the writings of Ratzinger and John Paul II, I would say that and everybody watching here, you know, I'm being kind of tongue-in-cheek here, of course, but I don't think what's closely ahead of us could be the second coming of Christ. I wish it was. Going by the teaching of the church, what I think is ahead of us is worse. It's going to get worse.
Well, I agree with that.
We're in the time before.
Yeah.
We're in the time before. And
Yeah.
if anything, if you look at Revelation 20, where it talks about the 1,000 years in which the devil is bound, and through the eyes of St. Augustine and Tychonius, that's the time we live. The age of the church is 1,000 years. And then there'll be the time when he's released. And we've had plenty of popes and others that believed, Leo the 13th, that we're in that time, which he's been released. Did it begin before the French Revolution? Was it during? But the point is, if we're going, but it's going to get worse and it's going to get nasty.
More intense. I mean, Balthasar said that if you read the theology of history contained in the book of Revelation, what you see is a very dramatic construction of where history is going, where there's going to be an increasing drumbeat and crescendo of either yes for Christ or no and against Christ, so that there will eventually then be this huge conflict between the gospel and the anti-gospel, as the choice becomes clearer and clearer and clearer as history unfolds, and you can't just sort of stay in the middle. And that's what John Paul apparently said as Wojtyła in 1976 when visiting the United States. He apparently said, we are now facing the final crisis between the gospel and the anti-gospel. And Ratzinger's statements about the smaller, more chastened church of the future. It's not that that's what he wanted. He was predicting that's what was going to happen as our culture became increasingly more and more. But that's why I threw the caveat in there about we're criticizing apocalypticism, but that doesn't mean that we're not living in deeply troubled times. My critique, and I think your critique, deeply troubled times with spiritual significance, and I would be the last person to say that I know what's around the corner. My point would be that there is a danger with becoming obsessed with this stuff. There's a danger with it becoming the primary motivator of your life, like, oh, I'm not going to plan for tomorrow because Jesus is coming tomorrow, or it drives you to a very sectarian, ghettoized approach to the faith where to hell with the world's going to hell in a handbasket. I'm just going to retreat into my compound. That's certainly not the message of Dorothy Day and Peter Morin and a host of other people. And so anyway, I wonder if you could then, so we're warning against the dangers of a certain spirituality, a certain mindset that goes seeking after, as Paul says, you want your ears tickled with these tales and so on. But anyway, go ahead. Well,
as you mentioned, I've got a whole library full of books on this, and I was writing this thing, and it seemed like they break down into 5 categories of writers.
Books on farming, on small scale farming,
small sustainable living, all these things, and so it seemed that there were 5 groups, and I'd love it to see if you connect with these. The first group,
I do.
The first group are totally theoretical, philosophical, ideological. There's nothing in there about how to farm. It's just the ideology. And in some ways, I might put Dorothy Day and Peter Morin in that group of folk. I'm thinking E.F. Schumacher, Wendell Berry. One of my favorite writers, a local writer here in Ohio, was Gene Logston. Of course, we got Neil Postman with Technopoly. I put in that category a writer by the name of Nash, who wrote a book on wilderness and the American mind, which was the founding book for radical environmentalism. So all these books that really kind of convince you. You could put Chesterton and Belloc in there that kind of convince you the need for detachment, for simplicity, for the value of agrarian lifestyle, the danger, Schumacher, the danger of technology. So there's a whole bunch of books like that.
Yep.
Right. Group 2 built on that, but group 2 were folk writing about how we gotta change our government. We gotta change the economic system.
Down with the man.
There was a bunch of, but the one that comes out at me was a book called Who Owns America. It was written in the mid-30s. I
read that. Yeah.
Yep. Alan Tate was one of the co-authors of that, a Catholic convert. And then third group it's kind of funny. You got the ideology, then, okay, now what are we going to do this? So let's change the government. Well, then there's a group that says, well, that's not going to work. So we got to live in communities. That's what it's all about. We get like-minded people together.
Like Benedict Option sort of thing, yes.
Benedict Option's a newer version. I can't remember what book I use, but there's a bunch of those. And I remember interviewing in the Journey Home program one time a guy who was living in one of these communities where everybody had 5 acres. They all lived in an area where they would pool their money to have one gardener, and they'd all live in 5 acres. And it was okay. And then a fourth group of these books are okay. What all this is really about is how you can leave the city and go out on 5 acres of land and make just as much money as you did in the city, but live out there in the country. That's what it's really all about.
I want to come back to that when you're done with this list. That's a big one to me. So go on.
It's all about making money. That's why you're going to it's not about, it's about making money. And so there's that. Then the fifth group, which was actually in the end my second favorite. I love the ideological books, but then this was.
I do too. E.F. Schumacher's book was great in my life. Yeah.
Small
is beautiful. Yeah.
It really was. And what people, when they read that book, says, well, he must have been into Hinduism and all that. No, he was a Catholic convert. People don't realize that. But his book wouldn't have sold if he used Christianity as a model. So he used Buddhism. But anyway, the fifth group are sustainable life. So in other words, you go out and how can you live on the land, not necessarily just by yourself independent, but how you can more provide for your family. And this is more Aquinas's view of the farmer. Aquinas's view of the farmer is there's 4 basic things we need. We need clothing, water, food, and shelter. And if a farmer focused on providing that for his family, he's done. He's done. His day is done. If you've provided those, add to that going to church, but they're just done. But when you get beyond that to the non-essentials, there's no end to the non-essentials. And then we've opened the floodgates to materialism. But so sustainable is how, if you got 5 acres, how can you provide for your family? I mean, think about it. If I am on my little 20, I got 40 acres right now. If I on that raised all my food in terms of my garden, I've got chickens, I got eggs. I'm not milking a cow anymore, but I did, so I could have milk and cheese. I could have a pig over here that drank all the extra milk, and I could have him slaughtered every 5 months, so I got meat in the freezer. My point is, I'm doing all that myself. It's not costing me a cent because I'm getting all the food to feed them off the land. And that's what it means is I'm having to take less out of my savings to go over to the grocery store. So the more self-sustaining I can be, the better I'm providing for my family. So that's this fifth group has a wide range of how totally independent, off the grid you are, prepper type. Well, no, I don't want to use prepper type because that's the fear-mongering group in my mind. But it's really providing for your family all the way to some self-sustainers are already caught up in making profit over and above. So that's kind of the 5 groups of books that began influencing me, my friend.
Yeah, and when I, first got started, I mean, like I said, I was a university professor for 20 years. And even though I grew up in Nebraska, I grew up in Lincoln, in the city, and knew nothing about farming, and actually couldn't wait to get out of Nebraska and head to the East Coast and the big city and the excitement of the East Coast and the big. It reminds me of, I had a seminary professor once, Father Cornelius Holly from County Kerry, or was it Cork? County Kerry. He was a Kerry man. And he knew all these Nebraskans in the seminary. He goes, you Nebraskans are a lot like Irish. And I said, how's that, Father? Well, you love your homeland and you can't wait to get the hell out of it. That was definitely me. Now at age 63, I wish I could go back and live on a farm in Nebraska. But anyway, the point is I knew nothing. So Carrie, my wife, calls me the YouTube farmer because I didn't do so much like you did, read a whole bunch of books because YouTube was there when I started. And
I didn't have YouTube. Yeah.
And so, I was watching all of these videos on homesteading and cottage farming and whatever you call it. And I just got such a chuckle when you sent me your essay today because I was reading that list, that bullet list, taxonomy of genres. And I thought that is just so true. And the one I really want to dwell on right now is the one where, because, I'm serious. I know a lot of young people, like former students of mine and stuff, who are very inspired by us moving to the farm. There is, in all seriousness, a movement among a lot of young people today who do view, I think rightly in many ways, urban environments as kind of toxic for the raising of families. They do want to move to a more rural environment where they can enjoy the rhythms of the land, get to a more small town atmosphere. Everybody knows their neighbors, kind of a thing. It's a bit of a romanticized vision, you can hate your neighbor as much in the country as you can in the city. And in some ways in the cities, there are actually excellent little pockets of community in urban neighborhoods. So it's a bit of but you get my point. A lot of young people are drawn to this image. And I sort of lost. Oh, one of the things I want them to know is this: don't buy the hype on the internet, especially on YouTube, from these little small scale farmers that go on here and promise you, hey, look, you can grow microgreens on 2 acres and make $100,000 a year because all these grocery stores want organic, locally owned microgreens. I think Curtis Stone. I think that might be his name. He's run all these popular YouTube videos on this. And a friend of mine really got into that and went and rented land and started growing microgreens and discovered nobody wanted his microgreens. And I said to him, buddy, do you understand that the dude on the internet has 1 million subscribers and that's where he's making his $100,000 a year? He's not making it selling microgreens to Wegmans. I'm sorry, he's not. Okay. And he's scamming you. And so that bullet point of yours really hit home to me that, all right, anyone listening to this who thinks I want to live a more Christian existence and I want to do it on the land, do not think, unless you are a farmer with skills and equipment and economic connections and like 100 acres or more, that you're going to make. I know people back in Nebraska who have larger farms who barely make ends meet. Right. I mean, farming is in economic crisis even on a large scale these days. It's hard because the vagaries of the commodities market. I mean, and 1 year corn prices are through the roof. The next year they're through the dirt. Yeah. And then there's weather. So do not believe that you are going to make your living off of small scale farming. You're just not going to.
Especially when I read these books, I read magazines. I don't want to mention any names, but they're making a lot of money making these magazines and books.
Oh yeah,
and
yeah. You know the magazines. You see them at the bookstores.
And they're feeding you. But my problem is that often these people wanting to go back to the farm, on the one hand, they're thinking about what their grandparents did on the farm, and they want to have that life. But what they often want is they want that life without their grandparents' faith.
Good point.
There's a connection there. And when we think about our grandparents on the farm, my ancestors came from France to Quebec in 1666. They were the generation right after the martyrs. And the Grodins they came as servants. And after 7 years, they got a piece of property up there on St. Lawrence. So then they had a big farm family and they crossed Canada until they came into Michigan. That's all that they did. But they were people of faith and they lived simply. When they died and they left their belongings to their children, they may have had 2 suits of clothing. That's farming.
Yeah.
But the farming you're talking about are people saying you can go out there and get 5 acres and you can make as much money on that as if you would in the city with this dull old job. And so, people are thinking, which is very interesting. One of the writers that really inspired me, Gene Logston, his book, The Contrary Farmer, I highly recommend it. It's a funny book. But he talks in one of his books about bib overalls. Why did we have generations of farmers that no longer wear bib overalls?
I wear them.
Okay, I do too. There's nothing better. There's nothing
Oh,
better.
yeah.
Because you don't have a belt around your belly. I know you don't have a belly, but I got a belly. And when
you want to see my belly? I have a belly. It's nicely hidden from my viewers, but yeah,
so
I have
you
a
know
belly.
that when you have a pair of jeans that you cinch a belt on and you start bending over a lot, pretty soon I start to throw up. So the point is, with such a great outfit, if you will, to work, why did farmers quit? It was because in the 50s and the 60s, pretty soon, farmers were seen as hayseeds. They were looked down on.
Right.
And, there was a whole move that you after the war, you can't get anywhere unless you get a college education. And so pretty soon, the bib overall became the symbol. And so farmers pretty soon don't wear it. And so the goal is to look like everybody else, to have the same lifestyle as everybody else. And so you see them buying these big acreages, big farms. They're not even farmers anymore. They're called agribusinesses. It's a whole different thing.
It is. And, those magazines you mentioned, I was at Barnes & Noble's bookstore not too long ago. And once again, I won't mention any names, but, there's like 2 or 3 major ones with a huge circulation, and they're mostly ads, and they're nice and glossy but I remember there was one that had an article about how to build a raised bed garden. And I thought, well, I'm building raised beds this year, so maybe I'll take a look at what this has to say. And so I flipped to the thing, and essentially I'll boil it down as this. First, spend $10,000 on cedar planking then you're going to want this kind of fence. And then you want this kind of composting soil, because that's the only thing that'll grow in a cedar. It's like, ugh. And so, you get to the end of it and you realize, oh, this is for a bunch of yuppies with, a $500,000 war chest who want their perfect little coiffed garden, And it just thought, well, and who reads this stuff?
I know.
Who writes this stuff? It's just so. And one time too, one of the problems, you can relate to this. One of the problems with having livestock is in the winter, the water tanks freeze.
Yep.
And so I always have to run extension cords out to our sheep to put a heater in the thing. But that's a pain in the rear. So I'm always on the lookout for, how do you keep stock tank water from freezing without putting, a heater in it? So once again, one of these magazines, an article, how to keep your stock tank from freezing. So I thought, oh, okay. So I opened it up, and it was essentially, first, buy a heater. Like, okay, I didn't need to spend $8 on this magazine to figure out I need to buy a heater.
Oh, Lord. Well, first of all, any of you guys out there that might be watching this and you're doing small farming, if we offend you, I totally apologize. I'm not being snarky about all of you.
No, we're trying to share our experiences with people who maybe are just getting into this, so they don't make the same mistakes that we made.
I'll just talk real quickly about 2 things. It cracks me up. What you just talked about, YouTube's, oh no, what am I going to do? Got my cattle out there and the stock tank freezes. What do I do? Go to the YouTube. And what you have are people that make money doing their little YouTube thing. So every time they wake up, they don't even have anything they planned today, but I got to do a YouTube thing to get some money. So they go out there and they say, well, let's see and so they do something. But I've been thinking about doing one, Larry, just for the rip of it. Here, buddy, following me. Today we're going to go out. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to walk out. We walk out to the thing. Okay, I have this 2x4, right? And then see the ice on that? Now I'm going to use this 2x4 to knock a hole in that water. We go. I just gave my cattle some water by knocking a hole in the ice with this random 2x4. Okay, I got a chicken house with no electricity. Oh no, the water's going to freeze. So I got to bury the wire, or I got to hang it through the trees. You know what? I have 2 of these little thingies that you know what I'm talking about. You put the water in and they
Yeah.
Take one out one day, take one out the next day.
Absolutely.
My point is, in my book, what I talked about is, guys, of course, I'm the worst farmer ever lived, so I should never say a word about it. But when I think about why we go to the farm, Larry, that the reasoning for it should be achievable by somebody living in the 21st floor of a downtown apartment in downtown Cleveland. What I mean is,
Yeah.
it really is about trying to live the gospel without getting all these voices.
Yeah.
I got to break free. And for some of us, we need to get out in the woods. I did. Because I discovered some things about myself that I would never have discovered if I hadn't gone out to the woods. On the other hand, a person who's called to live downtown because of their business or calling, and they're living in an apartment downtown, that doesn't mean that they can't live the gospel, live simplicity,
Right.
like Dorothy Day. That's what they're talking about. We still stand before God at the end of the day. We still stand before him at the end of the day with what we've done with this life he's given us. And just because we live downtown doesn't mean we have to have chauffeurs and big cars and lots of clothing. And no. And
oh, go ahead. You finish.
I was going to say the thing that I really discovered in my little piece that I wrote today, Larry, one of the things I discovered was, and I don't think I would have ever seen it in the city, but it wasn't until I got out to the farm and I had to do all this stuff. And then my boys, follow God's call, and they're no longer at the farm, and it's just me. And now I've just got to do it myself. I can't have them do it. I think, and I realized it's amazing how lazy all my life have become because of technology. The addiction to technology is just a part of us. I can be idealistic about, when in the morning I'm all gung ho, and tonight I'm not going to watch TV at all. I'm going to sit but after a long day, I just flick the old tube and watch an old Andy Griffith show. There I am, because
so true.
But our whole lives we've lived in this soup of technology. The beauty of going to the country is that you can at least maybe identify the way that this technology, like a cyst, has grown into our life. And maybe we can break free from some of it so that we can hear God.
Hey, I agree. And I want to talk about a couple of things. First off, I want to comment on the thing about our technology addiction, but then I want to talk about simplicity of life. We've been talking about a lot of practical things, but I really want to get at why it's actually a good thing to live on a farm, why it is a good thing to get back to the land. First, one of the blessings of our farm, I actually am in a little house here in Scranton, PA. It's not our farm. We own a second house near the Ordinariate Parish, 1 block away from where we're so active. And the Ordinariate Parish is 50 minutes from our farm. So we bought this little crappy house in Scranton. It cost us $40,000. And I didn't have $40,000, so we're paying a little mortgage on it. But it's my little studio sort of place. But the point being, though, another reason why I do everything here is it's good internet. My point is, back on the farm, our farm sits in a valley between two very large hills. Our property goes up a hill, and then there's a hill on the other side. So we get very, very poor cell phone reception, data plan. People always complain when they come to our farm, I can't get any reception. Good. I'm glad you can't get reception. All right. And I have to admit, when I'm there, I get angry too. It's like, how come my iPhone isn't working? Doggone it. All right. And the internet is sketchy. But you know what? That's a good thing. What it does is, man, it really does drive home that point you were making, Marcus, about how addicted we've become to this. And you and I did not grow up in the internet culture at all. I mean, I grew up in a culture where you turn on the TV and you had to wait 30 seconds for the vacuum tubes to heat up, and you'd see the little white dot on the TV when you shut it off. And there were 3 channels that you went and changed with a dial, and a portable phone was a rotary phone on the wall with a long cord. Okay. And we thought, that this is the 60s, man. And the Jetsons' vision of the future was around the corner, but we were still just barely above troglodyte level. And so if for people like you and me who did not grow up in an internet, computer saturated culture, a digital culture, as my friend Mark Stallman will point out. And so I want to make that point. We've shifted from an analog to a digital culture. This is Mark Stallman's point, and it's a brilliant point. And he's spearheading an initiative on this. He's going to have a meeting in Rome, a big meeting on what does it mean we now live in a digital age and not an analog age. And so I really do think that the one of the beauties of living on a farm is the simplicity of life. and a real need to. I mean, this is gospel based, and I think it's one of the things that attracts people. Maybe when they say things like urban life is toxic, I don't think they mean that their neighbors are horrible or that there's nothing but evil in the city. I think what they sense is its complexity, its busyness, its noise, its frenetic pace.
Yeah.
And so what they want in the country is for things to slow down, get quieter, to be able to live a less complex life, simpler. And that is a great spiritual quest, I think, for a lot of people. But that whole quest is short-circuited if you go to the farm for a simpler, less complex life, and you're sitting there with this.
Yeah, it's, think about St. Francis when he gave up, or maybe Benedict, when they gave up their wealth and their place in the city and they left it to go to the cave. Okay. Benedict, what is 6th century, 5th century? Or
yeah.
Okay, or now what was life like in the city in the 5th century? I mean, what was the difference of life in the city versus life in the cave? I mean, they didn't have indoor plumbing. They didn't have,
how long did Benedict live in the cave? It was several years.
Yeah.
Several years before he felt ready to form the monastery. Yeah.
Right. So, I'm not belittling the radical decision he made, but the difference between what he left and what he went to was not anywhere near the difference. If you and I decided we're going to just chuck everything and go out and live in a cave, today, it's just so, and my point is that illustrates how much our lives are full of conveniences and technologies that we've become dependent on, that if we really felt called to live a life like Benedict or like Francis or like Dominic or it'd be almost impossible. In fact, it's happening to the Amish now, even, and we don't want to get into this big long discussion, but the Amish, when they gave up electricity back in the 19th century, the reason was when Edison was pushing for these grids in these small towns, the Amish were just like everybody else. But the question was, do we connect to the grid? And they had two questions to address. And the Amish said this: number one, if we buy into this grid, this technology, will we be able to preserve our culture? And number two, if we buy in and don't like it, will we be able to get out? Yeah. And they said both times no. So they didn't go into it. So that's why they stayed off the grid. But now what are they doing? Now they're into batteries. They're into lithium batteries. And now they want to be able to do every single thing that we can do, only not connected to the grid. They're losing the reason, the simplicity that they were trying to preserve in the first place, because it's addictive.
They also run puppy mills and make expensive furniture that's way too expensive for what it's worth. I mean, the Amish. I love the Amish, but I mean, they're like any human being. They have their faults and failures, and in Pennsylvania, they're well known for running these horrible puppy mills, and it's like, oh my goodness. But you're right. I think you're right historically as to why they opted out of the grid, and I actually kind of respect them for that. And I think one of the attractions for a lot of people today in this Back to the Land movement is precisely it's some version of that. Yeah. It's the desire you hear all the time about, I want to live off the grid. And oftentimes that means spending $20,000 on solar panels and windmills and stuff like that. Yeah. We looked into that for a while. And I just said to my wife, Carrie, I said, instead of spending $20,000 or $30,000 on solar panels and windmills and all that, why don't we just try to see if we can't develop the skills necessary to live without electricity should that day come? So we have a wood burning stove that heats our house. We have a water well and so on. So bucket well and
that's sustainable. That's that whole sustainable idea, which is
exactly.
That's sustainable. It's not crazy sustainable, but it just, how can we take littler steps so that when Big Brother makes a big decision, or when we go to war with a company, my whole life isn't in jeopardy.
But let me tell you, I mean, that's absolutely true. But I want to keep harping on this idea of the internet and technology, because when I talked about the gravest crisis for us on the farm when the power goes out isn't loss of heat because we have wood stove or water or whatever. It's that, oh my God, the modem is off. Oh, we've lost Wi-Fi. Oh no. Oh no.
When Schumacher wrote his book.
And we don't have a good data plan on our farm, like I said, because of the mountains. So you have Wi-Fi from the internet company, or you got nothing. So anyway, yeah, Schumacher.
Well, think about Schumacher and Postman. When they wrote, and they were both warning about these dangers of technology. When they wrote, they didn't even dream of the technologies that we now have that are controlling our lives.
Exactly.
When Schumacher and Postman left their house, nobody knew where they were.
That's right.
When I began the Journey Home program in 1997, I didn't have a cell phone. I'd leave the farm and I would drive an hour to an airport. I'd sit in an airport for an hour. I'd fly an hour and a half to a place, sit an hour, fly to another place. But the point is, that whole time, my wife couldn't contact me unless I used my AT&T credit card and got out and used one of those pay phones. That was just 25 years ago.
I know. And now, I mean, my wife was at the farm. I was here in Scranton doing a podcast, and I decided to run off to the grocery store. And all of a sudden, I get a text message on my phone from her. Oh, I see you're at the grocery store, because she can track me. She's got that tracking. Oh, I see you at the grocery store. I need you to pick up XYZ. and there was a part of me that thought, damn, that is really scary. That's scary as heck.
This is late. This is about 2 years later. I had my first cell phone, and I'm traveling to EWTN. I've got cattle at home. I get down to EWTN. We're getting ready to do a journey home, just like you're right now. And I'm sitting on the set, and I had my cell phone. I forgot to turn it off. But it's about 5 minutes before the program's going to start live. My phone rings. Oh, no. I look at it. It's Marilyn. I look at, what's going on? She says, the cows are out. Yeah. What am I going to do? And I'm getting ready to go live on television. He said, well, get them in.
How is this my problem right now? But because she knew you had the phone, and she could, if there were no cell phone, there would have been no phone call. And you would not have known that your cows had disappeared probably into the ether until you got home. And that would be fine.
If we
but
didn't
it is
have a
interesting,
cell phone,
right?
We'd be motivated to think of other options first.
You and I grew up in an era, yeah, exactly, where, we would drive around at night, sometimes late at night. We didn't have any cell phones even when we were young, and now, see if this resonates with you and the viewers. If I leave the house and go somewhere and I forget to bring my phone, I feel vulnerable. I feel naked. I feel like, oh my God, I don't have my phone.
Yep.
What will happen to me that I don't have my phone? Is something horrible going to happen to me now? And
I've left my house and driven 7 miles to my office, and I get there and, I forgot my cell phone. I'm in an office where there are phones all over the place. I forgot my cell phone. Excuse me, guys, I'll be right back. So I get in the car, I drive back to the farm just to get my stupid cell phone to go back to the office.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the addiction of technology that we're kind of blind on how it's affected us.
And the thing is this. There's no easy answer to this problem because there's no putting the toothpaste back in the tube.
Yep.
One of the things, and a lot of people write about this, those more theoretical books, Technopoly and others, it's a thing called the technological imperative. If we have the ability to do something, then we will do it, because if we don't do it, somebody else will do it and make money from it. So everybody ends up doing it. So technology has this inbuilt tendency towards ever more over the horizon, more. And this impulse has deep economic roots in the economic engine, and now deep personal roots in all of our lives. So our entire lives, our entire economy, our entire culture is now governed by this digital technocratic imperative. And the trouble is, there's no reversing that, it seems to me, short of a complete culture-wide great leap forward, as I'll say, everybody goes back to the land forced, by the government or something. Everybody goes off the grid. And of course, that's not an option. There's no putting the genie back in the bottle. And so the real practical question for us now, which is why I think there is value in this back to the land movement, the cottage farming movement, why it is important, I think, for people, if they have the means and the ability to do so, to get back to the land if their heart is calling them to that. Because I think there is a witness value in people at least throwing speed bumps in the way of this technological imperative. Our entire culture, we can't become Catholic Amish, and our entire culture can't become Amish. But we can at least, as a service to our culture, model a form of technological fasting, is what I call it. Avail yourself of the good side of technology when you need it, but fast from it whenever you can. That's what I would say. Technological fasting.
Yeah, there was a great philosopher who became a president of the United States. I don't know that I need to mention his name, but he was the one that discovered it from his own experience, that just because you can do something you shouldn't.
Yeah, that's right.
I won't mention his name, but
yeah,
but that's the point, that this issue of technology, as you said, the technological imperative that we live in, and we're on this conveyor belt, but we still have the freedom to say no. And going to the small farm, I guess my point is, it's not cheap. It can be a money pit, and it's a lot of work. And for a lot of us, it's work we've never done before. And just because some guy can do it on the YouTube doesn't mean we therefore can just do it ourselves. I remember when I delivered my first calf, I had no idea. I remember I'd read all the James Harriet books, so I figured, hey, I know what I'm doing. So I'm down there, and this cow is laying funny, and it looks like her head is too low, and it's trying to come out, and I don't know what. I told Peter, go up to the house and get the book. So he gets a book, and I'm sitting there with this picture, and I got a cow coming, and I don't know what to do, and I think her hind end is too. So I stick my feet under her so I could help her, and I was almost as if she turned her head and looked at me and went. And all of a sudden, I had this calf all over me, but she's just laughing up there, and it's.
Well, what a great experience was that?
Well,
I mean, it's yucky and all that. Yeah, I mean, we had a similar experience with one of our sheep. We didn't know anything about sheep giving birth, and my wife Carrie, we were out in one of our very first years of lambing season. We had one ewe that routinely gave birth to overly large babies and had trouble, and we were out there and obviously she was stressing with this baby, and we were looking at each other like, well, what do we do? Just watch this ewe die right in front of us? So my wife says, I don't know. So she just rolled up her sleeves and she stuck her hands all the way up into the bird, grabbed this lamb by the head and the feet, and and it landed on top of her with all the afterbirth and everything. And of course it's gross and yucky, and she's going, getting it out of her face. But it was also the experience of a life, and of a lifetime. And to see, and a little off topic here, but I'm just trying to give an apologia for why this is good, to see the look on the face of a little kid. Another thing made me when like this little 3-year-old girl would visit our farm, 4-year-old girl, and she would stick her hand under an angry hen and grab out an egg, and the look of just sheer amazement on her face of, oh, this is where eggs come from. And she would, I get to bring this home, and she held on to it like this for the whole time she was at the farm. Or I was teaching another couple of very young kids how to milk a goat. We had dairy goats instead of dairy cows. And the look on their faces when their success, pinch, squeeze, pinch, squirt. When the look on their faces when milk comes out, and they're just giggling and happy. Those are moments. I mean, that sounds like something out of a Wendell Berry story or something, some romanticized. And I like Wendell Berry, but you get my point. Though those are experiences that you don't forget.
I tried to tell my sons when we'd go out to milk the cow. I said, guys, if all you're thinking about is getting this done so you can do the next thing, you've missed the most beautiful thing in your life.
Oh, Marcus, I want everybody to listen. When I would get up in the summer, first light, 5 a.m., I loved just grabbing the milk bucket. I don't know. You may have had a milking machine. I don't know. No. Goats. I'd grab that milk bucket, put on my John Deere cap, walk out to the milking run-in. The goats, of course, would run up onto the stall because they wanted their grain. 5 a.m., first light.
Yep.
Birds are chirping. Everything is quiet other than the birds. And you sit there and psh, 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 psh,
Yep.
and the goat is calm. I would sit there and pray more intensely than I ever have in my entire life, milking that stupid goat at 5 o'clock in the morning.
That's where I taught my sons to do the Jesus prayer.
Oh,
Lord Jesus
that's
Christ,
it. That's
Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Lord Jesus Christ,
Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Absolutely. I don't think we're the first or only people to ever pray the Jesus prayer while milking an animal. That's
but
fantastic.
This is what Bonaventure in the Journey of the Mind of God is talking about. The first step is listening, looking for the vestiges of God in the world around us. And so, like I said, you can either just say, get this done to move something else. And then when you do that, you get that done because you're never appreciating the moment. And I really believe that's what going to the farm helped me learn in a way. And the other thing is, Larry, I want to talk about you and I. The other value that I think you and I have, even though most young people today think that anybody 5 years older than them isn't worth listening to, but too many of the young people today, in my mind, it's as if they came into the movie halfway over, and they don't want to take the time to figure out what the first part of the movie was about. And older folk have been here for at least a longer part of the movie.
Yeah.
Because I know you aren't guilty of it, but I'm guilty of it myself. I came in terms of my parents' perspective, halfway through the movie, and I ignored them. I'm guilty of it. I'm being hoisted on my own petard here with complaining about my kids. But the point is, older folk can help remember a time when we didn't have this technology. So how can we put it into perspective? I remember when we got to the moon on a slide rule.
Yeah,
I went through college with a slide rule.
Absolutely, a slide rule. You see those old pictures from NASA of the 60s, or they're plotting the lunar trajectory using a slide rule and a pen and paper.
When I was a senior in engineering school, I was the last graduating class in which we used slide rule all the way to the end. And during my year, some of the rich kids were showing up with these pocket calculators that cost $600. And the big controversy was in the exams, could they use those? And our teacher says, go ahead and use them, because we could do it faster on the slide rule than they could on their pocket calculator at that point.
But this also makes another point, which is, the slide rule is itself a form of technology.
Yeah.
But we were not allowed in our algebra and in trigonometry and calculus classes to use those. It was a Texas Instrument little pocket calculator that did the sine, cosine, all that kind of stuff for you. You weren't allowed to use those, according to our teachers, because what if someday you don't have access to those electronics? You're going to want to have the skill of using a slide rule. To which a student raised his hand and said, but what if we don't have a slide rule? And the teacher had no response to that, because what he was essentially saying was, what's wrong with using this new form of technology? 200 years ago, people didn't have a slide rule, or 500 or whatever it was. And, somehow or another, they built Stonehenge and still figured out the seasons.
But that's about looking at the whole movie. That's why history is important. It understands where technology fits into that. And all along the way, we see the value of technology, but also see that it has sometimes collateral damage, that sometimes it affects things.
For example, I mean, yeah, nuclear power. Okay. Oh, when it was first, like, we're going to have unlimited power. And then, okay, then we build hydrogen bombs with it. All right. And technology always has that two-edged sword.
It involves choices. It involves choices.
Yeah. And the other thing is, Marshall McLuhan said, of course, famously, and he was a good Catholic, he's, the medium is the message, and that's become cliche. And he said a lot more than just that. But his point was absolutely spot on, which is this: technology is not simply a neutral field, sort of epistemologically or metaphysically or morally, spiritually, that we can just do good or evil with. It doesn't matter. No, it fundamentally molds how we view the world. And I think overall it's negative. And obviously technology is a vague term here, but I mean the whole digital revolution, which is now, there's more computing power in this Apple phone here. There's 1,000 or maybe 1,000,000 times the computing power in that little phone from what was on the lunar module that took the astronauts down to the moon. Amazing. Which is why they almost had to abort Apollo 11, because their computer was overloaded and didn't know where to go. Okay. And so, yeah, we just keep getting science and technology increases exponentially. And I think, since McLuhan is right, the medium is the message. I think because I sense it, I'm infected with this bacillus. I'm not preaching to others. I'm a leper preaching to other lepers. I know I have been affected negatively overall by the technological digital revolution, not positively. And I don't think it's a false nostalgia for my youth to say that. I noticed, for example, that as soon as I started using the internet on a regular basis 20 years ago, 25, whatever it was, my attention span has gone.
Oh, yeah.
Thank God I wrote my doctoral dissertation before there was an internet.
Yeah. I used to have pen perfect handwriting as a draftsman, and now I can't even read my writing. It's slow down. I can't do it. It's like Dr. Strangelove. I'm hitting my arm just slow. And
it's why C.S. Lewis, for example, or maybe it was Tolkien, C.S. Lewis or Tolkien, one or the other, refused to, in a sense, type out what it was they were writing. They always wanted to write it out longhand, because it was a whole different discipline. It slowed you down.
Yeah, well, yes, I forget. I knew of another writer that really talked about the beauty of that, because it allows your writing to give your mind more time to think through. In fact, it amazes me now when I think about people who did use a typewriter. I mean, I would have so many whiteouts because
me too. Yeah.
I've become so sloppy with electronic keyboard because I can correct it like that. And then, we've moved on. And we can't, as you said earlier, we can't go back, and it's changed us in the process. Our little town out here, I know we're getting way over time, but I live here by a little canal town in Ohio that at one time, 100 years ago, was a really beautiful little town on the Muskingum River. It was a canal town, farms all over. You could live in the farm, get on your horse, go 5 miles if you had to into town, and get everything you needed. Everything you needed.
Yeah, that's right.
Everything. Now, it was stores, the shoe store, clothing store, grocery store, hardware, everything was there in that town. Then the big malls came in, and pretty soon the little stores got closing. And then the Walmarts closed those down. And then now the bigger super mungai stores closed those down. And now the internet has closed all that down. And now that little town is almost a ghost town. And we can't go back, though. I mean, I'm not going to invest $100,000 to open up a little shoe store in that little town. I can't do it. We can't go back. Everything has changed, and that's what technology has done. So going to the country is examining all that. How has this affected us? And more importantly, how is this going to allow me to live out the gospel better? I mean, that's really what it's got to be about.
And I think like you said, we're kind of getting overtime, but I think that's a great way to end, because it segues right into the thing that I really wanted to end with, which is prayer. Yeah. The number one thing that I find beneficial about having moved back to the land, I'm a Benedictine oblate, and so is my wife. We have an icon chapel on our farm. And we do the liturgy, the hours in there. Whenever people come, we do. I just think it's absolutely critical to understand that this is one of the greatest benefits of moving. We were joking earlier about praying the Jesus prayer while milking our milk animals, but that is just so, it's so typical of life on the farm, and it just seems so much more natural to me to walk into our little chapel, which is just a tiny little building. I don't know what it was originally for, and like I said, it's an icon chapel.
It's one day I was out on the back acreage, and I had to put a gate in. It's way up there, and I could have gone. I didn't have one. I could have gone into Lowe's or wherever and paid $100 and bought a big battery drill, because I had to cut drill a hole about as big as my thumb to put one of those big round gate hooks on. And I thought, no.
Yeah. What do they call those? I do that all the time.
Yeah. But
you have to put liquid detergent in there. It helps.
You're right. So, but I had one of those things that my dad gave me. I said, I'll just do that. So I went way up in the back, and there I am, and I'm doing it. And I'm not using those muscles. It's hurting my chest, and I'm pressing, and I'm doing that, but it's quiet. I'm hearing the birds, and I'm enjoying the beautiful day. It was just an absolutely wonderful experience. And when I finished it, I was standing there, and I heard something behind me, and I turned, and there were my 10 sheep in a row with all their heads like this.
Yeah.
Larry, that was worth it.
Absolutely. And it was not for everyone. That story maybe will only appeal to 99% of the human race, but there will be 1% that'll say, ooh, sheep, no way. That's true. It's absolutely true. Or even the unexpected. Watching, I was going up our hill to where we had our meat ducks. We were raising meat ducks one year, Pekin ducks, the big white Aflac ducks, right? Those ducks. Right. And even though it was annoying, when I got up there, I saw a huge, massive golden eagle on top of one of the ducks, which it had killed, eating it. And of course, I was upset that one of my meat ducks was killed and that I needed to protect them better. But as I approached, the eagle flew off, with this 12-foot wingspan. And I just looked at it, and I said a silent prayer to God, and I said a prayer for the duck. I thank you for sacrificing yourself so I could have this moment of seeing and nothing ever loses the magic of seeing a bear. I don't know why, but I love seeing the bears.
I don't think I have any by me, but
we have bears near us. We don't see them often, but we've seen them. But anyway, once again, we're getting into that prayer, and it's a vocation, and I think we've covered a lot of bases, and I have to have you on again. It seems like we could end just endlessly. I think we're brothers by a different mother, and so it's just so much fun talking to you. I hope the viewers. Do you have any last words, Marcus, before we sign off?
Other than we probably need to get together again, talk about a few of these things. But it is neat to have somebody. I'll be honest with the folk. One of the problems with small farming today is you don't have community.
That's right.
Like they did. You don't. I don't have anybody within screaming distance of where I live that I can talk like I get to talk to you, Larry. So it's funny. Here I am being able to talk to you about our shared experiences. But to do that, we needed the technology.
Oh, I know. The whole irony of that was not lost on me as I'm sitting here with my Shure condenser mic and my little ear beats and, and all, my iMac sitting in front of me, my Logitech Brio camera. Oh, yeah. I'm a complete fraud. But anyway, hey, thanks for watching, everyone. And thank you, Marcus Grodi, once again. And we'll have to do you might be a regular on this show. I love it.
Whenever.
Bye.
All right, my friend.
Just be sure that we're off here.
Okay.
Well, usually it gives me a little message, but where's my glasses? I need my glasses. Oh, right in front of me. I'm so blind I can't see where my glasses are. Yeah, it stopped recording.
Okay. Well, that was fun, my friend.
Well, I don't know. Wait a minute. It's still Still says recording. I don't know. I hope we'll have to edit this out. But anyway, I will. Well, it's always great, Marcus. I'll talk to you soon. Wait a minute.